I'm David Martin Davies, and coming up on The Source, Shadi Hamid had been a dependable critic of the United States foreign policy for being too intrusive. But today, the Washington Post columnist is defending the necessity of U.S. global dominance as under President Trump, the U.S. is leaving the global stage and clearing the way for Russia and China to emerge. And later on The Source, should San Antonio move its municipal elections to November? Mayor Gina Ortiz-Jones joins us to explain why she thinks November elections would save money and boost voter turnout when the city picks its next mayor and city council. We'll also hear about calls for free via bus rides for everyone all the time and lowering the speed limit in residential neighborhoods. This is a community conversation. We want to hear from you. Call in at 833-877-8255. That's what's coming up on The Source, but first, this news.
Support for The Source podcast comes from UT Health San Antonio, South Texas' largest academic research institution, where what is discovered in its labs translates into life-changing patient care. More at uthealthsa.org.
As 2025 comes to a close, the value of trustworthy journalism has never been greater. TPR remains dedicated to delivering real, reliable, trustworthy news. We are proud to be here for you, and today, we need you to be here for us. Without federal funding to help shoulder the costs, your support is essential on the road ahead, and we're counting on you. Visit tpr.org to make your end-of-year gift today.
Live from the John L. Santico studio in downtown San Antonio, this is The Source from Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. Later in the hour, we'll be joined by San Antonio Mayor Gina Ortiz-Jones. But first, America First. It's the phrase that MAGA and President Donald Trump echo as the United States steps off the global stage, ending U.S. aid, food support for starving areas in the world, ignoring international climate talks, and slapping tariffs on international trade. Shadi Hamid is a columnist for The Washington Post and the author of the new book, The Case for American Power. He says the U.S. leadership in the world is a necessary thing, and retreating from international leadership is a mistake. Shadi Hamid, welcome to The Source.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So this is an unusual role for you. You have been a dependable critic of the United States, being overly involved internationally. What's changed?
Yeah, so, I kind of came of age politically as an anti-war activist in college during the Iraq War. I kind of, I was familiar with all the sins that the U.S. had committed, overthrowing elected governments, staging coups in Latin America. And those are the things that I think, a lot of us are aware of to one degree or another. And I think those criticisms still stand. The U.S. has done a lot of terrible things in the world, including the Iraq War, which I think was a historic blunder. But I think that part of what I'm trying to argue in this book is just because we've done bad things in the past doesn't mean we're doomed to repeat them in the future. That America is capable of change and improving itself and having a better foreign policy. But then there's also the more realistic, I think, just acknowledgement that power must be wielded by someone. And when we look at the available options, the U.S. is the best of those options, in my view. So for all of our faults, for all the mistakes we've made, I think there is still a strong case that America should be leading in the world, and that the alternative is worse. I mean, the alternative primarily is countries like China and Russia, which are brutal dictatorships, and we are not. Again, for all our flaws as a democracy, we still are a democracy, and in some sense, I think that makes us morally superior. And I know that that kind of language can make people uncomfortable to say that we're better and to be very, open about that. But I think at some level, we have to be proud of our country, and we have to believe that our country can play a positive role. Otherwise, what are we left with?
Our number is 833-877-8255, 833-TPR-TALK. Listeners, do you see the United States leaving the global stage as a good thing, a bad thing? Is this something that is going to hurt the United States in the long run? And what about the rest of the world as the United States becomes not the power player that it once was. So, Shadi, where do you see the U.S. retreating? What things bother you the most about the United States taking a diminished role?
Well, I think, as was mentioned, the end of U.S. aid, the end of food support, the end of any number of programs that contribute tens of millions of dollars in different countries on things as basic as providing sewage, clean running water. These are things that the U.S. has helped with in places like Africa without much fanfare. It doesn't get a lot of attention. So I think there's a concern about, well, who's playing that humanitarian role? But I think also the fact that Russia and China have become more aggressive, China towards Taiwan and Russia, obviously the Ukraine war has been one of the major stories of the past few years. It's a reminder that when the U.S. steps back, other actors step in and they cause chaos. And what U.S. leadership can provide is a kind of moral aspiration. I mean, we are founded on a distinct moral mission. We are a kind of ideological country, and the ideology there is liberty and freedom, and not just at home, but the idea that other people should be able to enjoy those freedoms abroad. Granted, we haven't always lived up to those ideals, especially in the Middle East. But if you look at the post-World War II era, at the end of World War II, there were only about 8% of the world's countries were democracies. By the 1990s, that number had risen to over 50%. And I don't think it's coincidental that happened, that improvement, that increase happened when the U.S. was a superpower. When the U.S. is a strong, assertive democracy, trying to at least live up to its ideals, that provides a kind of demonstration effect. More people want to imitate us and be like us. If we had lost the Cold War, on the other hand, and the Soviet Union won, we would probably see more socialist and communist countries expanding throughout the globe. So the fact that the U.S. is dominant has actually, on balance, been a good thing if we look at the expansion of democracy abroad. And I worry that as the U.S. retreats, we're going to see the continued rise of authoritarian regimes as an alternative.
So when you say, this is the title of your book, The Case for American Power, you're talking about soft power, right?
Soft power is a major part of it, which is the idea of persuading rather than coercion. But there is a role for hard power too. Sometimes there is evil in the world and evil has to be fought. And I think that if there are actually successful examples of U.S. military intervention in the last few decades, not to mention, of course, World War II, which is, I suppose, the obvious one. But if we look at ending the military intervention in Bosnia to end the Bosnian genocide, or in the late 1990s, the intervention in Kosovo to end ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, or the first Gulf War when Iraq invaded and occupied Kuwait. There was no other power that could have stopped that from happening, that could have actually resisted that and saved Kuwait from that occupation. So there are actually examples, if you look closely enough, and you can say, well, sometimes U.S. hard power is necessary because sometimes people are being killed, they're being massacred. And if U.S. force can stop that or put an end to it, then maybe it's worth considering as an option. And I think that's one of the reasons you see to this day that Bosnians and Kosovars are surprisingly pro-American, or not surprisingly pro-American, I should say, because they remember the role that the U.S. played there, and no other country was willing to rise to the occasion.
But in the past, you have been critical of America's use of hard power.
Indeed.
Especially in the Middle East.
Yes, and the Iraq War is example number one there.
And when you call it a historic blunder, that sounds like an understatement.
Okay. Historic blunder to me sounds like a pretty big deal, but I can even...
I could really go on and on about what a terrible decision that was, the deception that was engaged with the American people to get us there, and how nothing went according to plan and according to the promises that were given.
Yeah, so I think you're right that in some sense, blunder is maybe making it sound more like a mere mistake. It was worse than that. It was deliberate. and it was based on deception. And as someone who was an early opponent of the war and kind of cut my political chops as an activist during that war, organizing die-ins and tent-ins, actually, when I was at Georgetown as a student, and I talk about that in the book, there is a personal element here. I don't think we should go around toppling dictators whenever we feel like it. There should be
which we're talking about doing right now in Venezuela. Let's take a break here. The number is 833-877-8255 for you to jump into the conversation. Do you think there is a case to be made for American power, globalism? Give us a talk. Give us a call. This is The Source on Texas Public Radio. We'll be right back.
Support for this podcast of The Source comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider committed to rewarding policyholders who keep their workers safe and losses low. More at texasmutual.com/TXM Advantage. Texas Mutual. Texans get it.
You're listening to The Source on Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. In the next half hour, San Antonio Mayor Gina Ortiz-Jones will be here to take your questions and calls. Right now, we're talking about the case for American Power. It's a new book by Shadid Hamid. He is a Washington Post columnist, and he is saying that the United States is making a big mistake and by withdrawing from the world stage. So is it a big mistake for the United States in terms of we're actually hurting the United States by not being the global player that we are, or are we just withdrawing from our responsibility?
Yeah, I think that we're hurting ourselves ultimately, because if the U.S. isn't able to sustain its role abroad, that means that China has more room to rise and to be more aggressive. So there is a kind of basic geopolitical dimension here. But I think there's a deeper issue, which is we need to remember who we are as a country and what we stand for. And it's always been part of the American fabric of our self-conception that we're not just a normal nation state. We don't only care about what happens within our own borders. There's always been a sense of a deeper mission. And if we lose that sense, then we also, I think, lose a source of the pride that we have in our country. And then we have less to be proud of. And this is a major concern now. There's actually a recent Gallup poll that shows that American pride is at all-time lows. In the early 2000s, over 85% of Democrats were either extremely or very proud to be American. That number has now dropped to 36% in 2025. One of the biggest drops I've ever seen in a survey. So this has happened just over the last 2 decades. And I think that has to do with the fact that we have failed so much abroad. We don't know where we stand. We don't know how to project power. Sometimes we're more aggressive. Sometimes we restrain ourselves, but we're sort of aimless and rootless. We don't have a clear sense of being, I think, as a country. And I think my book is an attempt to lay out a vision for reclaiming that, for finding a way to be in the world and to actually live up to our ideals. So when I talk about power, I'm not talking about power alone. I'm talking about power combined with morality. That power alone is just the raw use of force. It has to be guided by something deeper. And that something deeper is the moral commitments that we have as a country and as a people. And if we only have morality but not power, then we have a different kind of problem where we're just saying nice things, but we're not actually following up on that or using power to make sure those ideals have a chance to survive in the world. So I think there has to be a middle ground. You need both.
Let's go to Helen on the phones, 833-877-8255. And Helen, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. Much like the speaker was just sharing, I think one of the things that we've lost as a nation is that social contract between the population and the government. And a new one needs to be established, much like FDR's New Deal. Thank you.
All right, Helen, thank you for that. So is there a social contract that with Americans or with the world? What kind of contract do we have there, Shadid?
Well, I think it's fraying now. I think a lot of us as Americans, one of the reasons we're not as proud and we're losing faith is because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is somewhat unusual as a president because he doesn't even pretend to live up to human rights or ideals. He doesn't even say that we should. There is no pretense. And I think sometimes it's good to have a pretense that even if you're not meeting your expectations, at least those expectations are there. But Donald Trump doesn't offer any expectations for himself. It's all about a kind of narrow transactionalism where he does whatever he feels like in the moment, whatever's in his own interest. And I think that makes it hard for us as Americans to feel like there's a social contract when we feel that the ideals that our country has stood for are no longer being observed. And it is worth noting that Donald Trump is very unique in that regard. And he's probably the first president who hasn't at least used the rhetoric of promoting human rights and democracy abroad. So what I would like to see is a president who actually is serious about promoting those ideals, not just in rhetoric, but in action. And that's going to take a long time to kind of get back to that point. And if a Democrat wins in 2028, we'll see if that can start to be rebuilt.
What responsibility does the United States have to the rest of the world?
So I think there's a couple different ways of looking at it. I mean, one way is to say we're just going to be a nation like any other and focus inward and not worry so much about the world. If we were a smaller country, if we were a different kind of country, then maybe that would make sense. But I do believe that we have a responsibility to something beyond ourselves. And I think that we're going to see it's one of those things that you only realize it when it's gone. If we come to a point where the U.S. is no longer the superpower, I think a lot of us are going to be longing for the past and saying, if only we realized how lucky we are. Because without the U.S. playing that kind of role, there could be a collapse in just general, a real collapse in the world order that we built after World War II. Now, does the U.S. have to play that role? I think people can differ on that. My argument is that it should play that role because we should care about people beyond our borders. We shouldn't just be America or Americans first. That we are a world of humans, and we should want other people, not just Americans, to share in some of the prosperity, peace, and freedoms that we've had in our own country. And if we stop doing that, I think you're going to see more and more disillusion where people just give up on us. At least now, there's a sense that America might still be able to play that role. People are still waiting. But I don't know how long that's going to last. If we have, let's say, another decade of Trump's Republican Party, then you might start to see people really give up hope in the rest of the world and say America's done. America's never going to go back to the post-World War II role that it played.
Let's go to Patrick on the phones. And Patrick, you're on the air. Go right ahead.
Hey, good morning. Interesting topic, gentlemen. I'm a veteran. I know what it's like to have boots on the ground because they were my boots. I doubt your speaker has ever served in the military or has sons or daughters, for that matter, that are military age. But we got to be really, really careful. Hell is paved with good intentions. Intervening to help people struggling against a dictatorship, I'm all for it. I hope the Venezuelan people would overthrow their dictator on their own. The reason I oppose any escalation of our involvement in that or any third world country is when we come in and take sides or try to bring about change, the dictators always rally their people and say, hey, I'm one of you, and these are foreigners, and they're wanting to impose freedom or liberty or the Constitution on us. And it invariably makes the dictator, strong man, president for life, a stronger person because he's seen as taking on the big, bad, evil United States. I think, I remember the Somalia debacle, and that was something we tried to do because we wanted to help some oppressed people. That was a total fiasco. Unfortunately, we were so shocked and scared after Somalia that we stood by and let, Tribe X slaughter Tribe Y or whatever in Rwanda. And it was black on black crime, basically, and nobody cared. But I just can't justify an internationalist, strong, boots on the ground foreign policy pushed by people that themselves probably aren't going to be tapped up to go jump in a plane and parachute down and fight.
All right, Patrick, thank you for those comments. We appreciate that. So, Shadi, talk of U.S. Toppling the dictatorship in Venezuela, military action there already. We are blowing to smithereens boats that are, we don't know who they are and what they're carrying, but the administration is saying they have drugs, but it's still uncertain. What does that do to the case for American power?
I mean, the speaker makes a really good point, and I want to be clear that I'm not in favor. I'm 100% against what Trump is doing in Venezuela. The use of military force should be a last resort, and it should only be in very specific cases. And I raised Bosnia and Kosovo for a reason, because in those instances there was a genocide going on. In Rwanda, where we didn't act, I think there could have been grounds for the U.S. and others to intervene there. If you have 800,000, a million people being killed, then the world, I think, does have a responsibility to at least consider stepping in. But those conditions are not met in Venezuela. There is not an ongoing genocide there. The Venezuelan opposition has not asked us to militarily intervene. And so military force is something we have to be, especially after Iraq. I mean, that was one of the major lessons of Iraq, but there's other ways for the U.S. to use its leverage, to use its diplomatic pressure, and to improve situations abroad. I mean, one example is the Arab dictatorships that we still support and that we've supported for decades. My argument isn't that we should invade Egypt. My argument is that we should use the military aid we give to countries like Egypt to put pressure on them to open up their political systems. And that's what we should do throughout the world, always putting pressure, never being content with authoritarianism, but trying to do so in a peaceful way that avoids the use of military force.
I'm going to go to Benjamin very quickly. We're short on time, Benjamin, but we're getting you on the air. Go ahead.
Thanks. Overall, I'm in agreement with the author's points. However, I'd just like to bring up the fact that as long as the outcome of our general elections are determined by dark PAC dollars, there is no consistent public policy toward anything.
Benjamin, thank you for that point. Appreciate it. So the United States as a democracy reflecting the will of the population, is that even happening now? And is that why the United States is stepping off the global stage in the way that it is?
Yeah, in the end, we get the government we deserve and we get the foreign policy we deserve. So as critical as I am of Donald Trump, I have to acknowledge this is what the American people voted for. I think it was a mistake, but democracy.
He ran as the peace president.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit skeptical of that framing, but yes, he did portray himself in that manner.
He won the FIFA Peace Prize.
Yeah, exactly, he did. Yeah, he's someone who talks a lot of game about peace, but obviously his actions in Venezuela show that there's a lot of contradictions there. I think that this is if Americans vote for something, then we have to live with the consequences for 4 years. And again, if we don't like the role that Donald Trump is playing in the world, then it's up to us as Americans next time around to vote for something different and to call on our elected officials to be engaged in the world, but to do so in a way that is true to our moral sensibility as a country.
So let me real quickly, I'm almost out of time. How much responsibility do each and every one of us individually have for the actions of our government? If the United States is doing things that are immoral, how much responsibility do I have for that?
As a collective, we're partly responsible.
But I have a responsibility to speak out.
Yeah, we all, and that's what I think we all have to do as individuals. And I think my book is in part a call for Americans to remember the best of who they are and to stay in the system, to get involved, and to not see power as a dirty thing. That power is something that has to be held by someone. It has to be engaged. And we can't just wash our hands and say, oh, power is dirty, power is corrupting. Because ultimately someone has to lead and someone has to hold power. And I would prefer that the people who hold power are more moral and more just in their thinking. But that means we have to be the ones as individuals to call on that. And that gives me some hope too, because it's up to us and it can change in 2028 or 2032. And that's my hope.
Shadid Hamid is an American author. His new book is The Case for American Power. He is a columnist for the Washington Post. Shadid, welcome. Thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's The Source on Texas Public Radio. David Martin Davies, thanks for listening.
This has been The Source on Texas Public Radio. The Source is hosted by David Martin Davies. Tim Gutierrez is the show's producer. Additional production support from Steve Short, Ruben Garcia, Yvette Benavides, and Dan Katz, Vice President of News. The Source is made possible with support from the Gladys and Ralph Lazarus Foundation.